This week we're going to build a live edge table with some epoxy inserts. I'm going to show you the methods and techniques we took in building this beauty, and you guys do want to stick around until round about the middle of this video because we had a really big problem we had to solve. We had a major epoxy leak that almost cost us a lot of money. Starting this week's project off, the specific wood species we are using is only sourced from the country I'm from, South Africa. It's called leadwood. It's a really heavy wood and it's a really hard wood. And we're starting this project off by measuring around about, I think the length of this table was 2 meters, and that's what the client required. And taking out my Festool HK85, I absolutely love this machine because I can make really thick cuts without doing multiple cuts. The thickness of the slab was around about 65 mil, and I ended up cutting the slab one go. Getting some local help, loading the slab on my van to take the table to a local supplier that's got a 1.3 meter wide belt sander. Now that's something we haven't got yet, and the reason why we do this is just to make our surface much more smoother to work with. Having the table back at our shop, we had to close the underside of these large voids to make sure that once we're going to pour the epoxy, that it's not going to leak out. And what I'm doing now is calculating the amount of epoxy we're going to need for this project. And calculating epoxy is a really easy calculation. It's length times width times height. It's super easy. I actually got a few videos I already made that's going into detail on how to calculate the amount of epoxy for your projects. Coming back to the video, this is where I made the biggest mistake that almost cost us a lot of money. And that's by being shy with the amount of silicone we're going to use. The reason why we apply this line of silicone is I already cut a small piece of white melamine sheet, basically going to stick to the underside of this slab. Like this. So the whole idea is to apply silicone, apply a white melamine sheet to cover that void. So once we're going to turn the slab, we're going to pour the epoxy inside the holes and cracks, so the epoxy is not going to leak out. So looking back at this video, that step I'm doing there is something I will definitely take with me in the next project. We have to do something like this, is applying silicone right around the wood I just placed on top of my table. This is going to make double sure that you're not going to have any leaks on your table. Taking my table to my flat table. This table is specifically designed for pouring epoxy, and you'll see in the next step, there we go. I should have knew right from the beginning that we're going to have issues, but no. You know, we are clever. Anyway, placing the table on the flat casting table and starting the pouring process, we ended up starting only pouring a little bit. We left it for around about 10 to 20 minutes to see if there's actually any leaks on the underside of our table. And to be honest, there was no leaks whatsoever. But I think once we added more epoxy, the weight started to get more, and it started slow. It started with 1 drop, and then it started with 2 drops of epoxy leaking, and I thought to myself, it's not going to be a major issue because the epoxy we're using for this project takes around about 4 hours to start becoming like a jelly form. And as soon as I knew it, we ended up with so much epoxy leaking out. And as you can see here, sorry for the video not being stable. At this stage, everything was full of epoxy. The floor, the table, my hands, my workers, every single thing was full of epoxy. And we ended up catching all that epoxy in a bucket, because we actually had to clean the epoxy and the epoxy had to go somewhere. We caught all that epoxy that was leaking out. It ended up being full of dust particles and so forth, but we ended up using that epoxy again. And the reason why is this is a lot of dollars lying in there. We ended up throwing away more than half, but we ended up using more than half of the epoxy that was leaking out. And as you can see, the epoxy inside the bucket was slightly harder than that, but it was in a form that once we heated it up slightly, the epoxy came more in a liquid form. As you can see, we ended up using that epoxy again for our project. Now the color we're using is a solid black, which is going to help us to reuse that epoxy, because you don't want to lose any money on a project like this. The consistency of this epoxy was like a sticky apple type of epoxy. Now this was a total mess, and there was a lot we learned on this project, and the only way you can learn is by making mistakes. Coming back a few hours later, we mixed a new batch of epoxy and we poured that as our last layer on our table, just to make sure that we're sitting with a fresh layer on top and the client will never know we ended up having a massive issue on this table. Now just flipping the table over to remove the white melamine on the underside. You'll see now the leaks we had on our table. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys ever had an issue like this. I would honestly like to hear from you. It's the first time it happened to us, and I can promise you it's going to be the last. Fast forwarding a bit, we came back from our supplier that sanded our table both sides with his massive belt sander. We done the first stage of the oiling at the bottom of our table. Now we're flipping the table to do the top side of our table, and we're going to start off by sanding our table with our ETS Festool finishing sander. We're going to start sanding with the 80 grit sandpaper all the way up to 320 grit sandpaper. And the reason why we sand so high is because the oil we use is called Odis oil. Now, Odis oil allows you to sand to higher grits, meaning that you're going to have a much more smoother surface on your project. Now, Odis claims you only need one coat of oil, but with our experience and talking to a lot of manufacturers out there that's using the same oil, is normally when we only apply one coat of oil, and around about a week or two after we deliver the project, you'll see that the wood looks very thirsty. And the method we like using in applying Odis oil is we will start with the Odis oil Super Duper, and as you can see here, the Super Duper is a much more liquid form. So we will apply the oil, We will wait 1 hour, we will wipe it off, we will leave the table for 24 hours, we will come back the next day, then we will apply the original Odis oil on top of this layer of Odis oil Super Duper. We will wait 1 hour for the original Odis oil to dry, wipe it off, and then we will deliver the table. Now, before I'm going to leave you guys with the final product, can I ask you guys a favor? We are on the journey of hitting 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Now, I know it's a massive milestone, but we do have goals. So if you guys can support us by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the notification bell so you're not going to miss any projects we're posting. We also have a ton of other projects such as epoxy tables and so forth. And you guys do want to stick around until the last end of this video, where we're going to show you a short preview of the epoxy online masterclass we're presenting. I'm also going to leave a link down in the description where you can find this masterclass. This online masterclass is going to teach you from start to finish how to build a epoxy table successfully. I'm also going to leave a link down in the description where you can find all these details. Thank you guys for watching this week's video, and I'll see you next week with another super cool project. Keep safe, guys. Cheers. Welcome to this online epoxy masterclass. Moisture content. You hit right into the core wood species to remove the bark with an aggressive steel wire brush. Table design, slab preparation, building process, epoxy mold. Release agent wax, calculate epoxy. 7, 8, so we got 16 points. Mixing epoxy, color consistency, whether to seal your live edges or not. Pouring epoxy, sanding between layers, sanding grooves inside your epoxy, dealing with bubbles, maximum depth, curing time, removing the table from your mold. Our local CNC supplier. Start sanding, cutting your table to size and edges. Filling the cracks and holes. Smoky finish, high gloss see-through finish. Wood surface finishing, tabletop supports to drill into our wooden section. Our online epoxy masterclass is finally here. It's 4 hours of masterclass where I'm going into detail on how we build all our epoxy tables, where I'm going to teach you from start to finish how to build a epoxy table successfully. I'm going to show you all our methods and techniques we take in our everyday business building epoxy tables successfully. Down in the description of this video, you're going to find the details on how to purchase this masterclass. You don't want to miss this one.